Here's the script with each sentence on its own line. There's a moment most people never talk about. Not the rock bottom everyone describes in interviews. Not the dramatic turning point with swelling music in the background. I'm talking about the quieter moment. The one that happens before any of that. The moment you're standing in your kitchen at 6 a.m., still in yesterday's clothes, staring at a half-empty coffee mug, and you whisper something to yourself that you've whispered 1,000 times before. And that whisper, those few words, have been quietly building the walls of the prison you're living in. Marcus didn't realize this until he was 37 years old. Broke in ways that went far beyond money, and sitting in a hospital waiting room after his father's second heart attack. That's when a stranger, an old man with paint-stained hands, and the kind of calm that only comes from having survived everything, said something to him that cracked his whole world open. But we'll get to that. Because first, I need you to understand how a person ends up there. How someone intelligent, capable, and full of genuine potential spends a decade running in place without ever understanding why. Marcus grew up in a mid-sized city in Ohio, the kind of place where ambition was respected in theory but quietly discouraged in practice. His father worked the same factory floor for 26 years. His mother cleaned office buildings 3 nights a week. They weren't unhappy people. They were exhausted people, which is a completely different thing, and a distinction Marcus wouldn't understand until much later. He was the kid in school who teachers always wrote the same thing about on report cards. Has potential, needs to apply himself. He heard that so many times that eventually, the word potential started to feel like an insult. Like being told you're holding a lottery ticket but never being taught how to cash it in. He got a job at 22 doing IT support for a mid-level insurance company. It paid decently. It was fine. Fine is such a dangerous word, by the way, because fine doesn't hurt enough to make you leave, but it doesn't feed you enough to make you stay. Fine is the slow leak that drains everything while you're busy pretending the tire looks okay. And every morning, Marcus would wake up, shuffle to the kitchen, and before he even poured his coffee, he would mutter the same 3 words under his breath. I can't afford it. Someone would mention a business idea at lunch. I can't afford it. His wife Denise would talk about taking a trip. I can't afford it. A course online, a better neighborhood, a gym membership, starting something on the side. I can't afford it. Now, here's what I need you to really sit with for a second, because it's easy to hear that and think, well, maybe he genuinely couldn't afford those things, and maybe sometimes he was right. But the problem wasn't the words themselves. The problem was what those 3 words were doing to his brain every single time he said them. There's a concept in neuroscience that most people have heard of, but very few actually understand in practice. It's called the reticular activating system, and it's essentially the brain's filter. Every single second, your senses are bombarded with millions of pieces of information. Sounds, colors, temperatures, smells, conversations, movements. Your brain cannot process all of it, so it filters. And here's the critical part. It filters based on what you've told it to look for. When you buy a red car, suddenly you see red cars everywhere. They were always there. You just weren't looking. When Marcus told himself, I can't afford it every single morning, he was programming his filter to confirm that belief. His brain stopped scanning for opportunities, for creative solutions, for alternative paths. It was doing exactly what he trained it to do, proving him right. And every year he did this, the walls got a little higher. The vision got a little smaller. The version of himself that once dreamed of building something, of traveling, of providing a different kind of life, that version got a little quieter. Denise noticed before he did. She didn't say it cruelly. She said it the way people who love you say the hard things, softly, carefully, with their eyes down like they're hoping maybe you won't actually hear it. One night after dinner she said, Marcus, I don't think it's about the money. I think somewhere along the way, you stopped believing you were allowed to want more. He didn't respond. He turned on the TV, but that sentence lived in him like a splinter, small enough to ignore, impossible to forget. His father's first heart attack happened on a Wednesday. His second happened 14 months later. And that second one is what put Marcus in that waiting room, beige chairs, fluorescent lights, a television mounted too high on the wall, playing a channel nobody chose. He sat there for 3 hours, and at some point, the old man sat down next to him. His name was Gerald, 71 years old, retired art teacher, there because his wife was having her knee replaced. He had the paint-stained hands Marcus would later describe in detail. Deep in the cracks of his knuckles. Permanent, like the paint had become part of him. They talked the way strangers talk in waiting rooms, which is to say, more honestly than they'd talk almost anywhere else. Marcus told him more than he intended to. About the job, about Denise, about the feeling that life was happening to him rather than being built by him. He didn't plan to say all of it, it just came out. The way things do when you're scared and tired and the fluorescent lights are humming and someone is actually listening. Gerald didn't offer advice right away. He asked a question. What do you say to yourself first thing in the morning, before the world gets loud? What's the first thing you tell yourself? Marcus thought about it, and then, a little sheepishly, he told him about the 3 words. I can't afford it. Gerald nodded slowly, like someone confirming a diagnosis they'd already suspected. Then he said, those aren't words about money. Those are words about identity. You've been telling yourself who you are every morning for years. No wonder you believe it. He paused, then said, what if you changed just 3 words? Not your job, not your bank account, just the words. What if instead you said, how can I? Marcus stared at him. That's it. Just how can I? Gerald smiled. Questions open doors. Statements close them. You've been slamming a door shut every morning before you even got dressed. Try opening it instead. Just for 30 days. See what happens to the way you see things. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, because I would have thought it too. That sounds like the kind of thing they put on motivational posters in dentist offices. Simple to the point of being dismissible. And Marcus thought the same thing driving home from the hospital that night. His father's stable, Denise asleep in the passenger seat. But something happened at 5:47 the next morning. He woke up before his alarm, the anxiety of the past few days pulling him out of sleep early. He went to the kitchen. He stood over the coffee maker, and in that half-awake haze, he heard himself start to form the old words, I can't. And then he stopped. And instead, almost experimentally, like a child trying a food they're sure they won't like, he whispered, how can I? And his brain, that incredible, trainable, filter-using brain, paused. How can I what? It wanted specifics. It wanted to work. It had been given a question instead of a verdict, and questions, unlike statements, demand engagement. He thought about the business idea he'd been dismissing for 3 years, a mobile tech repair service. Something he knew he could do, something the area genuinely needed, something he'd researched twice, and then filed away under can't afford it. And standing there in the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling, the sun just barely suggesting itself on the horizon, he thought, how can I start this without much money? And his brain started answering. Not perfectly, not completely, but it started moving in a direction it hadn't moved in years. What if he started with just one service? What if he used the equipment he already had? What if he offered to fix 3 people's phones for free in exchange for honest reviews? What if the first month wasn't about profit, just proof of concept? He grabbed a notepad. He wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. That had never happened before. I want to be honest with you here, because this story isn't a fairy tale and you deserve the real version. Marcus didn't quit his job the next week. He didn't make his first $10,000 by month 2. What happened was slower and more real than that, which is actually what makes it so powerful, because it's the kind of change that actually sticks. What changed first was his attention. That filter, his reticular activating system, had been reprogrammed. He started noticing things. A neighbor who kept complaining about her laptop, a coworker who'd broken his phone screen twice in 6 months, a community Facebook group full of people asking for tech recommendations. These things had always been there. He just hadn't been looking. He started small, embarrassingly small, by his own admission. He fixed 2 phones on a Saturday for $20 each. He posted about it online with a simple, honest message. I know how to fix your devices. I'm trying to build something. Hibe me asot. He got 3 messages that week. Then 7 the week after. Denise noticed a notepad on the kitchen counter. She picked it up one evening and read through pages of ideas, pricing structures, service offerings, A simple logo he'd sketched badly in the margin. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she looked up at him with an expression he hadn't seen in years and said, "You seem different." "I changed 3 words," he said. She thought he was being strange. He tried to explain. She listened more carefully than he expected, and that night, for the first time in a long time, they talked about the future using the word when instead of if. There's something that happens when you shift from statements to questions, something that goes beyond productivity and goal setting. And all the language we use when we talk about self-improvement, it changes your relationship with possibility itself. A statement like "I can't afford it" is a closed room. A question like "How can I?" is a hallway with doors, and you don't have to open all of them. You just have to start walking. Marcus told me, and yes, I spoke with him. This is a real conversation with a real person whose details have been adjusted for privacy, not a parable invented to make a point. Marcus told me that the most unexpected change wasn't in his business. It was in how he listened to other people. He started hearing when people around him were living in their own closed rooms. A colleague who kept saying, "I'm just not a people person," when what she meant was, "I'm afraid of rejection." A friend who said, "That's just how I am," every time someone pointed out a pattern that was hurting him. His own mother, saying, "We're just not the kind of family that does things like that," when his sister suggested a vacation. He started gently, very gently, asking them questions instead of agreeing with their limits. What would it look like if you could? What's the smallest possible version of that? What if you tried it just once and it didn't have to work perfectly? He wasn't preaching. He wasn't performing. He was just opening doors in conversations, the way Gerald had opened one in that waiting room. And people responded. Not always immediately, but the seed got planted. By the end of the first year, Marcus had a part-time business generating just over $2,000 a month on top of his salary. By the end of the second year, he'd transitioned to full-time. He hired his first employee, a 20-year-old kid who reminded him painfully of himself, and had a conversation with that kid on the first day that he thought through carefully. He didn't give a speech about hustle or mindset or the grind. He said, "The most important thing I can teach you isn't technical. It's this. Whatever you tell yourself first thing in the morning, that's the business plan your brain is going to execute. Make sure it's the one you actually want." The kid wrote it down. Marcus noticed, and he felt something close to what Gerald must have felt in that waiting room. The quiet satisfaction of passing something forward. That costs nothing and changes everything. His father recovered, slowly, with new restrictions and a different pace of life. But he recovered. And one afternoon, sitting on the porch of the house Marcus had grown up in, his father watched him take a call from a client, handle it efficiently, confidently, and then hang up and just sit there, easy in his own skin. His father said, "You're different than you were a few years ago." What happened? Marcus thought about the waiting room, about Gerald's paint-stained hands, about a coffee maker gurgling at 5:47 in the morning and 3 words whispered as an experiment. "I stopped telling myself things I didn't want to be true," he said. His father was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, the way people nod when something lands somewhere deep and they don't have words for it yet. "I've been thinking about this story for weeks since I first heard it, and I keep coming back to one thing. How much of your life is being quietly shaped by words you don't even realize you're saying? Not the big declarations, not the arguments, not the things you say in important meetings or emotional conversations. The small stuff. The murmur under your breath in the kitchen. The thought that completes itself before you're even fully awake. The quiet verdict you've issued on yourself and your circumstances that you've repeated so many times, it just sounds like the truth now. I'm bad with money. I'm not creative. I'm not the kind of person who does things like that. It's too late for me. I don't have what it takes." Every single one of those statements is a closed door, and none of them are facts. They're just sentences you've said enough times that your brain stopped questioning them. What if you questioned them? Not with toxic positivity, not by pretending the challenges aren't real, but with genuine curiosity. What if the most radical thing you could do this week wasn't a new habit or a new routine or a new goal? What if it was just changing 3 words? "Nah, I can't afford it. But how can I?" Not "I'm not good at that." But how can I get better? Not "it's too late." But how can I start from here? Questions don't guarantee answers, but they guarantee movement, and movement Even slow, imperfect, embarrassing movement is how everything real gets built. Your brain is not your enemy. It's incredibly loyal, almost to a fault. It will work tirelessly to prove whatever you tell it is true. For years, maybe decades, you may have been handing it the wrong brief. The extraordinary news is that you can change the brief today. This morning, before the coffee is done brewing, you don't need a waiting room epiphany. You don't need a stranger with paint-stained hands. You don't need rock bottom, or a crisis, or a sign. You just need 30 seconds of intentional awareness at the start of your day, and the willingness to ask, instead of conclude. Marcus's father never changed his words. He lived a decent life and loved his family genuinely, and there is real honor in that. But Marcus chose something different, not because he was smarter or braver or more deserving. Because one exhausted, frightened night in a beige waiting room, someone asked him the right question, and he was finally tired enough of his own story to consider writing a different one. You don't have to be tired of everything. You just have to be curious enough to ask. So, here's what I want you to do. Not tomorrow, not after you finish watching one more video. Right now, before you move on, think of one thing in your life where you've been saying, I can't. Just one. And replace it with how can I. Write it down if you can. Say it out loud if you're willing. And then just notice. Notice what your brain starts doing with a question instead of a verdict. That's where it begins. Not with a plan, not with capital, not with perfect timing, with 3 words and the courage to mean them. If this story reached something in you today, I'd love to know what it was. Drop it in the comments below. And if you know someone who needs to hear this right now, share it with them. That's how these things travel. One conversation, one question, one open door at a time. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, because there are so many more to tell, and I'm not even close to done.